This is a book I got at the library today, and it's actually a book version of the website that Paul Thompson put together of the 9/11 timeline. And it kind of it doesn't contradict, it challenges the official story, the 9/11 Commission, and it asks a lot of questions about the propaganda versus the reality, which is why I was really excited to find it. I was reading through the introduction, which really goes into the lead up to 9/11. And I am not going to be covering that in my DHS history series, but there's some really important and really incredible things that I read in the intro that I want to show to you right now. I was in the 10th grade in 9/11, and I grew up in the post 9/11 era. However, I was not paying attention so much to these stories about how the Bush administration might have known about Al-Qaeda planning these attacks before the attacks happened. I'd heard it. I can't say I really paid much attention to it. I was a teenager, but I am here now, and I want to read some things I found in the intro on the lead up to 9/11, the Bush administration's story versus the reality if we look at the facts. We're going to start with this paragraph, which is packed full of stuff. A month before 9/11, President Bush had received a memo entitled "Bin Laden Determined to Strike in U.S." And reportedly, when he got this memo, he told the person who told him, "Okay, you've covered your ass." Next, FBI agent Colleen Rowley divulged that her Minnesota unit was trying to attempt to obtain a search warrant for weeks before 9/11 for information on the computer of flight school student Zacharias Moussaoui, and she was rebuffed by FBI headquarters. Isn't it always Minnesota trying to do the right thing and DC just shooting them down? And then FBI agent Ken Williams had released a July 2001 memo in which he basically laid out not exactly, but, there might be some terrorists in U.S. flight schools. So that was sitting in the Bush administration's desk for a couple of months. Let's see. Next page, we've got this tidbit up here that just gets to me. It's numerous articles reporting on the Bush administration's insistence that prior to 9/11, they had no idea that Al-Qaeda would ever use airplanes as weapons. But all these articles generally failed to remind the reader that many July 2001 reports, authorities at G8 summit in Genoa, Italy, had feared that Al-Qaeda would attack the summit with airplanes guided by suicide pilots, and that Bush himself had spent the night aboard an aircraft carrier so as to not be targeted in such an attack. Bush, that sounds a little suspicious, doesn't it? And then down to here, we've got this 60 Minutes story, October 9th, 2002, where they give this really interesting tidbit. The author of the book looked the next day at all the different outlets. He watched CBS. He looked everywhere, and nobody else mentioned this, but listen to it. Just days after lead hijacker Mohammed Atta, and this is before the attack, returned to the U.S. from Spain, Egyptian intelligence in Cairo says it received a report from one of its operatives in Afghanistan that 20 Al-Qaeda members had slipped into the U.S., and 4 of them had received flight training in Cessnas. I'll have to look that up, the pronunciation. To the Egyptians, pilots of small planes didn't sound terribly alarming, but they passed the message to the CIA anyway, fully expecting Washington to request information, and the request never came. It's like, what were we doing? Apparently, the U.S. government was more concerned with their space operation. Doesn't that sound familiar? And looking at Cold War era threats, they were looking at all of these reports before 9/11. Apparently. I don't know. One last fact I just wanted to share with you. This doesn't really have to do with 9/11, but it is so significant that early 2004 polls indicated that a majority of Americans still believed that former Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein had a hand in the 9/11 attacks, and that a majority of the hijackers were Iraqi, or at least some of them. And the question asked here is, would the majority of the public have supported the war in Iraq in 2003 had the public been better informed about 9/11? And isn't that interesting? Because we heard a lot of rhetoric before we went into Iraq about weapons of mass destruction. And I guess I did conflate Iraq and Afghanistan and Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda in my younger days. I did conflate those two because that was the propaganda of the time. So it is so interesting how all of this just seems coordinated in the sloppiest way. And I just, I will definitely be using this resource for my series, but I thought that this was just too interesting to not share with you.